Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry, from tech companies that enable wineries to run at optimum efficiency, to today's guest, Hilary Cocalis, who is building one of the California's leading canned wine brands from the ground up. Past guests of Legends Behind the Craft include Daniel Dow of Dow Vineyards, Joe Wagner of Copper Cane Wine and Provisions, and Paul Mabry, CEO of Pick Stop Wine. If you haven't listened to these yet, be sure to check them out and subscribe. Today's episode is sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. I am super excited to talk today with Hilary Cocalis. Hilary's the founder and chief go-getter for Sipwell Wine Co. Sipwell is her first foray into wine after a long storied career in the beer industry. And this is also Hilary's first entrepreneurial venture. When she's not running Sipwell, Hilary's a brand advisor and consultant for other founder-led food and beverage brands. Welcome to the show, Hilary.
Thanks, Drew. I'm super excited to chat with you.
Oh, I'm super excited to have you on. So tell me how, jumping just straight into it, why did you decide to make the transition from the beer industry to the wine industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. The short answer is that I just like drinking wine. Mm-hmm. I love the beer industry and have still so many friends and contacts there. And even, in my role as a consultant and advisor to other brands, I'm working with other breweries too. So, always a beer fan and remain a beer fan. But, for me, I just, as I have gotten older, I've just gotten more and more interested in the craft behind wine. Mm-hmm. Fermentation is more or less the same, but just the wine grapes as an agricultural product and, how the land and the farming practices pull out the flavors, how the different grape varieties have different flavors and notes. It just, for whatever reason, that just really started to pique my interest. And I started visiting more wineries and going on tastings and just kind of becoming a student of wine myself. And so for me, taking the next step after, my career in beer, it kind of made sense to jump into wine. The learning curve in the alcohol industry already is pretty high. And so I feel like I had jumped that curve just, getting into the industry in beer. But, wine is totally it's a different animal. And it's funny, we've talked to brewers, they say winemaking is really complicated. If you talk to winemakers, they say, oh man, beer is super complicated. So, it's a grass is always greener thing, I think. But for me, it was a personal interest. It's where my tastes, started to go. And also just where I saw an opportunity to do something really unique and innovative with, wine in a can.
And that's the next one. So you made the leap from beer to wine and then choosing the can. Why cans?
There are a number of reasons why cans. First of all, they're more sustainable as a package. And, for me, it was a major sustainability play and sustainability message. Aluminum itself is typically a recycled material, even when they make a new can. It's made from majority recycled aluminum. But they're lighter to ship. They take up less space. They require less packaging. They're infinitely recyclable. So it's, recycle it and made into new aluminum cans again. And so the sustainability message was huge. The other piece of it for me was, personally, I was looking for a way to get wine into a smaller serving size. I'm a mom. I have young kids. I'd like a glass of wine at the end of the night without having to open a whole bottle. That's really, for me, the aha moment was, how can I do this in a way that I'm not wasting a bottle? I'm not drinking a whole bottle, but I have it in a convenient serving size that, a glass and a half, and I'm done. And, the can, especially the 250 milliliter can, which is what ours are, is the perfect opportunity to do that. So smaller serving size, so moderation, sustainability, And there is a quality piece to it. So, obviously you can't put all types of wine in a can. Wine that needs to be aged should remain in bottles and needs corks. But, for wine that's meant to be drunk fresh, there are a lot of advantages to wine in a can. You don't risk any light pollution or anything like that. And so in some respects, it actually is equally as good, if not better, for the quality of the wine to put it in a can. So
I would agree. I would agree. I am very enthused about what's going on in the canned wine business. I'm also wondering if they have done. They've got to be doing some stories about the ageability within a aluminum can.
I'm not. My business is not old enough to keep a library of cans, but I've had old can wine on it. I think the issue there is not the liquid, but the can. So any liquid in a can, especially somewhat acidic liquid, I think has a shelf life, and that's the limit of the aluminum, more than what it does to the wine itself. But
I see.
Ask me in 3 or 4 years and I'll tell you how our first vintages taste.
Yeah, that's going to be curious. I'm going to have to definitely do that. But for portability, for consumption, for immediate use, you're
right.
A pretty compelling picture of why most producers should be using canned wine.
Absolutely. And it's starting to become a thing in this category, but I still think there's a huge stigma around it. I think a lot of people just expect there to be bad bulk wine in cans and don't see a lot of folks like us that are doing small production, that are doing interesting things with grapes and fermentation, to, hopefully try and change that stigma.
Yeah. I mean, we had that stigma about 20 years ago when the screw caps came on.
Right. Exactly.
Came on the market.
Yeah.
And then Paul Meyer decides to work on it. And it was Plump Jack. Plump Jack came out with their screw cap on their $80 bottle. And kind of started changing opinions on that. So I think the audience is very receptive, and your target market is also more receptive to new things. Tell me about Sipwell's target market.
Yeah, so it's funny when folks ask me who the ideal consumer is, I say it's me. But I would say it is probably a younger wine drinker, someone who's interested in it, but maybe not that super nerdy collector. I think it's someone who is probably was drinking a lot of beer, probably got into craft beer, and now their tastes and they're exploring more and looking to try more wine, and just someone who is active, who wants that portability piece, wants the convenience of wine in a can.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I can say that it definitely, we go camping a lot, and canned wines have really changed the way that we pack for our trips. And then also going to sporting events, it's a lot easier to bring your can in than your bottle and glasses. Yeah.
And we live near the beach. I mean, it's so much easier to bring wine to the beach in that form.
Absolutely.
Too.
Yeah. That is a great point. So going back a second here, when you decided to found Sipwell, this is your first entrepreneurial venture. What prepared you for that?
That's a good question. I have no professional experience that really prepared me for it, other than working for companies and brands and working closely with founders and seeing other entrepreneurs do it, at a later stage, obviously. But I also tell people that I feel like I have it somewhat in my DNA. I've just always been that person who's coming up with business ideas, or even as a kid, all my pretend games were running a business or a store or something like that. So, I actually have kind of a cool family history on my dad's side. I am a 4th generation entrepreneur. So, so my dad is an entrepreneur. His dad and his grandfather, also were entrepreneurs. So like I said, I think it's somewhat kind of in my DNA. But other than that, I mean, no practical experience actually doing it and, getting the work done. So, that whole aspect of it, of just starting a company and building something from scratch, has definitely been, a huge learning experience for me.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. I've founded a bunch of different companies, some more successful than others. And I guess the biggest thing, other than being in your DNA, is that courage, just to take the leap and do it.
Yes.
And trust that when you're presented with a problem, you'll find the solution.
Yeah, I've always been kind of like a problem solver type of person, always been willing to get my hands dirty and kind of figure things out. It's funny though, because I would not call myself a risk taker. I think I'm generally fairly risk averse. This is probably among the riskier things I've ever done. So, in that respect, it's definitely been a little bit of a leap of faith for sure.
Talking about challenges and not problems, because there is challenges with solutions. What was some of the biggest challenges you faced when you were ramping up Sipwell?
That's a good question. A big challenge for me was just figuring out the permitting piece of it. So, I knew I had the product idea down. I had the business model down that I wanted to sell both online and potentially in person. But then it was a piece of just figuring out, well, how do I do this? How can I operate as a winery without having a physical winery location? So, navigating kind of the ups and downs of the alcohol legal system to figure that out. And then also just the challenge of figuring out how to get the wine made, how to get it in a can. And the biggest challenge we had really in the product development was figuring out how to make carbonated wine. So, the idea was always to launch with sparkling wine, which we do. We have 3 sparkling wines. But I didn't want to just carbonate it. I didn't want to just put some CO2 in a tank and put that in a can. I wanted to achieve it through some level of traditional method or something akin to sparkling wine. And so, figuring out that process was definitely a challenge, but a fun one. What we ultimately do actually is we do a process called can conditioning, which is pretty popular in the beer industry and cider, where the liquid goes through secondary fermentation in the can, and that's what creates the carbonation. But no one in wine is really doing that, or at least that we knew of. So me trying to figure out that process from scratch with the help of several other folks and literally doing homebrew R&D trials in my kitchen where, I'm mixing yeast and wine and capping it into bottles, all of that stuff. So kind of a fun challenge to get me back to my like homebrewing hobbies and beer roots to figure that out. But, that was the biggest challenge. And then doing that at scale, once we got to production, making sure it worked at scale was a huge challenge and a risk. And luckily it worked out.
How are you able, the canning facility, they're not set up out of the box to be triggering secondary fermentation. How did you go about that?
So good question. So I actually don't use a canning facility. I don't go to like a traditional like co-packer or co-manufacturer. What I do is I have a host winery in Paso. I work with MCB Wines. Matt Villard's the winemaker there, and he's great. And so have a lot more control over the production of the wine and setting it up. And then I partner with a mobile canner. So we bring in a canning line. So a lot more flexibility. And our mobile canning partner has a lot of experience with ciders, can conditioning on that level. So they were comfortable with it, or as comfortable as, they were willing to tell me they were. So, luckily kind of doing it, like I said, on a smaller production scale helped us to kind of work out those kinks and really be a lot more hands-on than going to one of these big bottling or canning facilities and, having a little bit more restrictions there.
Sure. I think that with the winemaking part of it, the amount of extra sugar you put in there is really dependent upon the alcohol level.
Yes.
So I'm imagining all the challenges you just overcame to make that happen.
Yes. Yeah. It's a lot of math too, which is not my strong suit.
How about finding the fruit? I know you source some of the lesser known varietals and kind of a little more distinctive than just your buttery Chardonnays. Yeah.
For me, I just feel like that's more interesting. I like kind of trying new varietals. I think getting people's palates beyond just, buttery Chardonnay or, super oaky cab is good, especially I think for California, for this market. I think we're, getting people to know California for different varieties, is really important. and it, again, for me being small production and trying to find out what's available, it's a little bit just at the mercy of what the market is. I don't have contracts with growers or other wineries or anything like that. And so, part of that is happenstance, and part of that is just, wanting to do things a little bit different and something a little more unique.
Sure. And so right now you've got 3 sparkling and then you've got a still Grenache.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Any plans to do it? My favorite is a sparkling Grenache. There's a canned wine out of Arizona, J.M. Keenan's Merkin Cellars. He's got a fantastic one. Actually, it's Queen Bee, his Queen Bee brand. Okay. I'm a big fan of that one.
Yeah, we actually talked about when we made the Grenache, and the original intent for it was to make it to be our sparkling red, but the way it turned out, it was just super rich, really complex. Like, love the flavor of it. And we said it not quite, at least what I had in mind for a sparkling red. I wanted something lighter, fruitier, and this one was just like, lots of oak and spice and berry characteristics, and so that again was kind of a happy accident. I mean, the Grenache is amazing. I would love to do more still wine releases. Oh yeah. But yeah, I mean, our sparkling red is made from Dolcetto, which is really cool. It's an interesting grape. It's kind of inspired by Italian Lambrusco, is the thought behind it and my inspiration for it. I would love to do more. It's got that crisp cranberry quality to it. Sparkling for sure. Yes. Yeah. Great. Like, you keep it cold. It's definitely, berry, cranberry. I love sparkling reds. Like, if I could, I would just make sparkling red all day long. I don't think the market is quite ready for that yet. I've been trying for 20 years to. Yeah. I know it's very big in Australia. Big in Australia, big in Italy. I mean, there are kind of subcultures for it. I think there's even pockets in the US where you find it, but again, that's something where I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve. I'd love to push people in that direction, and like I said, I would make sparkling red all day long if that's all I could sell. But I think the canned wine movement's going to finally it's on ramp to wide adoption. Absolutely. People are kind of used to drinking sparkling things from a can. Right. And that's part of it too. Is like, you want to drink something carbonated from a can. And so for me, sparkling wine made sense. Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned, just founding it, you found the source, you figured out how to do the secondary fermentation. How did you bring it to market? Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for me, that was the easy part. My background is in marketing. So, figuring out. You were the Ballast Point was where your background is. Yes. I was the head of marketing for Ballast Point. Yeah. So, that piece of it, the building the brand, the package design, even sourcing all the packaging and kind of building a go-to-market strategy, that was, like I said, I had that down already. It was. Did you find any differences between the go-to-market strategy for beer versus wine? Well, I mean, for me, a big one is that I launched initially as direct to consumer. So just the opportunity, wine actually has a lot more favorable DTC laws, I would say, than beer, at least, especially as you cross state lines. And so, the strategy was definitely different, just building this as a direct to consumer brand, thinking about the e-commerce component of it, which never really was a big part of Ballast Point's business, or not something I focused on. So, that was different, beer to wine. And, now that I am actually selling it into retail, there is a little bit of a learning curve of, how to speak to the wine buyer that's a little bit different than the beer buyer, and how people are thinking about their product mix for wine versus beer. The whole on-premise versus off-premise piece in wine is much, much different than beer. Dealing with kind of how do people think about on-premise pricing, thinking about by the glass price versus by the bottle, which when you introduce cans into the mix is a total, total different method. So that piece of it has been definitely something that's different. And yeah, I mean, it is interesting because because I have a canned product, it kind of toes the line. I find that my top retail accounts are sort of bottle shops, beer and wine shops, folks that are, thinking about craft beverages in general that are more progressive for beer and wine. So it is a wine product, but I feel like I'm kind of living in the middle. And so to speak, that could also be just an indication of being in San Diego, because it is such a beer focused market, and we are trying to build it locally, at least on a retail scale here. So, I'm talking around a lot. Hopefully I'm answering the question.
No, it's making sense. Just really kind of the differences that you found, and if there was any surprises that you encountered that you thought that was going to be easy and it wasn't, or you thought it was going to be hard and it's like, oh, this is a piece of cake.
That's a good question. In terms of selling it, would you
selling
say?
It, marketing it, just the differences between the beer and wine industry or the beer and wine marketing side, bringing it to market?
Yes. A big piece of it is just, product education. I think for wine, there's a bigger stratification. People either really want to know everything that goes into the production. They want the whole tech sheet. They want all of the details. Or they don't really care. They're like, oh, you've got rosé in a can. Great. Like, sign me up. It's either, being super crafty, being super knowledgeable, or just let's throw some, cheap wine in the back and go.
Talking about that, I was thinking about, at least now here in San Diego, I see the stores increasingly devoting shelf space to it. And I would see probably on the national level that there really was not a shelf space devoted to canned wine until very recently.
Yes.
So stick it down by the box wine or stick it some weird place. Right. Really conducive to sales, because you don't really want it next to the box wine because it's not of that.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. That, and that you bring up a good point, and that's probably the biggest challenge, is figuring out what the shelf space is for it. Where does it go? And for us, we've seen our products next to hard seltzer, kind of the other alternative beverages. We've seen them kind of stuck in just any of the random single serve ready to drink beverages. You don't really see it merchandised with a whole set of canned wine or with wine in bottles, so that has been a little bit of a challenge, because then we have to think about, well, how are we making sure our packaging is clear that this is wine? This is a full glass of wine. It's not a wine spritzer. It's not, a hard seltzer, that it is a wine product. But I think that will come with time. There are definitely certain stores that have a whole canned wine set. The Safeways of the world, I think, are fairly, devote a fair amount of shelf space to it. And I'm seeing it more and more, in some of the bigger chains, but it's, the neighborhood grocery store or, the bottle shop where, trying to figure out a space for it has been a little bit tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think that's me changing very rapidly. I do too. The perception of the category evolves. I had a similar discussion with Brian McMillan. He does Feisty Mead. They do about 20 different meads, and his biggest challenge is the stores don't know where to put the mead. Right. Because they maybe have two meads.
Right.
A little different, but same kind of challenges going to market. And you say you started direct to consumer online, and how did that go, going direct to consumer? And how did you market that when nobody knew who you were?
That's a good question. So one of our big learnings, launching the brand as direct to consumer, is that it's tricky with a beverage because people want to be able to try it, and when you're selling wine online, we're doing 6 and 12 packs, you lose that trial aspect. So people are trusting that they're buying a good product. Yeah. So
how did you find the original? How did you launched your site and
how did you get people there? We've been building it mostly through word of mouth. Okay. Do a little bit of paid advertising, but I really haven't scratched the surface there yet. I do some Google paid search, which has been pretty beneficial. But really it's just been through friends and family and building the brand locally. So a big part of it is, even though we sell online, in San Diego, we offer free local delivery. So we want to be considered a local brand that you can buy online, but it will come to you the next day. We have yet to kind of really scratch the surface. We're not truly built to be a true e-commerce brand like some of these other ones, like some of these other consumer products. I'd have to spend a lot more money in digital advertising, a lot more in, email communications and texting and all of that stuff, which we haven't done yet. That's not to say that we won't, but the way that we're thinking about it now is more of a combination of online plus retail and wholesale.
Sure.
And, building the brand, getting people to try it, by buying an individual can, and then hopefully if they like it, they go online and they order more.
And you've got a subscription service there. How do you have a subscription for the buyer's journey on that? Do they usually start with a one-off order and then get a subscription, or do you find them that just jumping in with a subscription?
It's typically one-off order, or what we try and do is talk to folks who have bought one or maybe two times, especially a repeat buyer. Someone's bought one and then they come back and buy more. Then typically we say, hey, did you know we also have a subscription? Sounds like you like the wine. You can get it to you delivered regularly, and flexibly. So
that's so important. I think few wineries do that secondary follow-up and try to, for lack of a better word, upsell the one-off buyers into a subscription.
Right.
How, of your sales, what percentage are subscriptions right now?
It's relatively low. I'd say it's about 10%. So, it's a number we want to grow for sure. We do, have a pretty high repeat buy. So we've got about 35% repeat buyers, which is great, but, still working on converting those folks to subscription. A lot of our online purchases have been gifts also. So we get a lot of people that are buying for somebody else and using it as a gift occasion, which was one of the main ways we were envisioning the mailer box that we send out. So now it's a question for us of, well, then how do we capture the gift recipient as someone in our community, and how do we get the gift recipient back to buy some more? And that's something we haven't quite figured out just yet.
In your subscription box, there's a lot of thought that went into that. It's not just your normal brown cardboard box being delivered, at least what I'm looking here on your online.
Yeah, we have, I wish I had one right here. You're looking at it, but it's,
we'll put it in the show notes when it goes live.
Absolutely. That's great. We definitely put a lot of thought into it. For me, I wanted to have just a really nice unboxing experience. I wanted people to be able to open it and see the cans on display. Part of that is just making that experience feel more premium, more special. It isn't just cheap canned wine. Like, this is a nice, a nice assortment that you have that are, worth the effort. And then part of it also, again, going back to the sustainability piece that I mentioned in the beginning, was really making sure we designed the boxes to use as little cardboard as possible. So there's not a lot of outer packaging. There's not a lot of layers. It's really designed to hold 6 cans or 12 cans very securely in as small a format as possible, so that we're using less cardboard. It's not as heavy to ship.
I got to tell you, I get a lot of wine shipments.
Yes, me too.
It is just almost embarrassing trying to get all that stuff into the recycling bin.
Yeah.
Especially when they ship the styrofoam. Oh, my God.
Right.
So kudos to you on that, for that. And what other advice? And I'm so happy that you mentioned the unboxing experience. I think far too few wineries pay any attention to that. And it may just be that they're having a third-party fulfillment doing it, but there's more to it. What advice would you give a winery that's trying to consider that?
I definitely would think about, the way that I thought about it too is, what other brands do I receive shipments for that I really like that experience? So rather than thinking about it of competing with other wineries, or how do I just make the wine secure, is what other things have I gotten in the mail that have just been a really nice experience when I open it, or not even in the mail. I mean, the classic example is just Apple products are just really well displayed if you open them out of a box, that sort of thing. So, in this day and age too, and this is kind of indicative of me and our consumers, thinking about kind of the Instagrammability of it, for lack of a better word. How is this going to look visually if somebody is posting that they've received a box of Sipwell wine? Is this going to be worthy of a post or a video? Is it going to look interesting when we're putting it together and showing a video of that? And so that was, a piece of it too, of just wanting it to be a great experience for someone who's getting it and opening it, but also how can we use this as a brand touch point? Again, my marketing background, how do we make this a really good brand experience that resonates with people?
It cues up the mindset into a positive, like you're excited to see it.
Right.
Opened it. And I know at the end, the wine speaks for itself, but
right.
You need all the help you get to cue it up and make it nice. And this does. I wish I could show it, but it looks like, it's a very, looks like a present. It's got one. That's fantastic. What advice would you, well, I guess I just asked that, but, I got to say your branding is on point.
Thank you.
Looking at your website, looking at the way everything's positioning, you can tell this isn't your first rodeo when it comes to branding. So when you're not doing Sipwell, you're helping other founders with their brands. It's one of the biggest challenges you see not even challenge. What's one of the biggest mistakes that you see as you go in to consult with other brands that you wish they just would have learned from the start?
Oh, that's a good question. One big mistake I see a lot, and I've also been victims to this, is that when you're living the brand every single day, you're thinking about it all the time. You are looking at it all the time. A big mistake is that I think people tend to get sick of it really easily, or they want to change things about the brand, change a package design or change, a logo even. When you're looking at your own brand all the time, you get fatigued. And what I try to remind people is that the consumer isn't getting as tired of it as you are. I think your brand has a lot longer shelf life than you think it does. And also you need to be investing in building equity in that brand before you think about making changes or before you go and do something totally crazy. The general mistake of just being too close to it and not stepping out and thinking about it from a consumer standpoint. On a similar note, what happens a lot too is that I work with a lot of folks who just assume that the consumer knows a lot more about the brand and the product than they actually do. Because of that, because the folks that are working on it are so in it. And I have to remind folks that you might need to repeat this message 3 or 4 times because you're living it day to day, but the consumer might have missed it or, may not remember it. And I have to keep that in mind for Sipwell also. When I have my own brand, I'm living it every day. I know all the ins and outs, but encouraging people to take that 30,000 foot view and kind of put themselves in the consumer's shoes, I think is something that a lot of brands and founders don't really do because they're so in the weeds of the business every day.
I can agree. That's great advice. And we see that every day in digital marketing. We either see two sides. We either see the company that built their site and never wants to do anything with it, or they built their image and it's just, that's the way it is. Or we see the one it seems like every 3 months they want to completely change it up.
Yeah.
It's gotten stale. There's got to be kind of that happy medium between complete just not doing anything and just being kind of bouncing all over the place with your image.
Right.
That's good. What, as far as your other brand advice that you give in your consulting, what's some of the bigger challenges that you come in and help people fix?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it sort of varies based on the client and how well established they are. I've done a fair amount of work where I'm just helping people get a brand new brand off the ground. So how do they figure out how to position the brand? What's kind of the brand essence, brand tagline, tone of voice, personality? So I do a lot of strategy work there with completely new to market brands. And then the other, I would say the other types of clients that I typically work with are folks who have built kind of a loyal cult following or have like a very strong market or a strong core product and are trying to turn that corner to be either wider appeal or wider distribution, or wanting to expand their product portfolio. So for me, two specialties are kind of getting something off the ground from scratch or kind of helping someone get into growth mode and thinking about how to evolve the brand to fit that growth mode.
What's the first step of getting into growth mode?
Oh man, again, the playbook changes every time, but I would, again, I'm a brand person, I'm a marketing person. So for me, it's always stay true to brand, make sure whatever decision you're making, whether you're picking a new market or entering a new product category, is how does this remain true to who you are and the brand that you've already built?
Sure. Shifting a little bit over to kind of online promotion and selling wine online. I mentioned in the first part of the show that Paul Mabry from Pix.Wine was on here, and they've just spent the last year trying to get this new platform up and running, where it aggregates all it. And I did a search today, and just yesterday it finally went live, so people can finally start searching. And I see Sipwell is on there.
Sipwell is on there. Yeah, I reached out to Paul right when they were kind of doing some beta development, and it seems like a really cool platform. I love the idea behind it, and what's great is that it integrates really well with Shopify, which is the platform I use. So he's definitely very in tune with all of the technology and the stack that everybody needs to have on the wine side, and have learned a lot with advice that he's given the industry, but also just how they've built Pix. I think what's interesting about Pix is that they've built this content arm as well. So they've invested a lot in wine education and writing articles about wine that, is only going to serve to help make them become experts, such that when you go search their database, you know that they're trusted for that reason.
Yeah, it really did turn out, when he was describing it, it really turned into that sort of wine search engine. Where it was kind of scary how easily you were able to see. Like, there's other platforms out there, but how easy you were able to research a particular wine, really find it, and then get channeled straight to the actual website, the Sipwell site, to make the purchase. Yeah.
Hopefully we get some purchases via Pix. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm gonna have
only time will tell. Yeah.
So what's your vision for Sipwell? You're off the ground. You're got your stuff in stores. Where do you see this stuff going?
So I would love to grow it to have a pretty strong presence at retail, at least within California. And then I would love to grow the digital piece of it as well, to have more of a national presence and figure out how to do nationwide shipping on a larger scale. And then in terms of the wine itself, I just want to keep making really cool wine in cans. I have ideas for things that are a little bit more unique in the category, and ideas for some innovation. Not quite there yet. I really want to perfect the products that we have and really get that dialed in. But the product development piece, I think, is going to be the fun part for me as we move forward, of what future Sipwell releases could look like in terms of styles, alcohol levels, that sort of thing.
Oh, that's very good. So kind of as we're wrapping down here, when you're not drinking Sipwell, what sort of wines do you really like to drink?
That's a good question. I mentioned it earlier. Lambrusco is kind of a pet favorite of mine. So like I said, anytime I can find a light, chillable sparkling wine, I'm usually picking it up. Beyond that, what do I drink? I really love a good dry Riesling. So kind of went through a whole Mosel area German Riesling phase. So, kind of that area. And then like Alsace, like Riesling, Gewürztraminer, kind of zippy white wine is normally my go-to, at least in warmer weather. And then other than that, you can't go wrong with a good glass of champagne, right? So other sparkling wine.
Absolutely.
Coming out of bottles usually. But yeah, those are my top three go-tos, I'd say. Yeah.
I've got to dive back into dry Rieslings a little bit more. I used to drink a lot of them.
Super food friendly, which, I find, and they're not everybody's favorite, but for me, there's something about it that just gets me. So.
It's always been a challenge because people just see it and they assume it's sweet, or they want it sweet and it's dry. And I think the average wine drinker has trouble navigating that. Varietal.
Yeah.
It was back when I was in the wine store. It was always the biggest challenge to sell.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hilary, where can people find out more about you and Sipwell?
So, good question. You can go on our website, which is sipwell.co, and then also we're fairly active on Instagram, which is at the handle sipwell.co as well.
Okay, great. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Drew. This was a great conversation. I'm happy to chat with you and happy to tell folks more about Sipwell.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, Helen.
All right, thanks. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.